In the heart of London's glittering season, where gossip was a currency and reputation a crown, Lady Evelyn Harcourt stood apart from the parade of silk and smiles. At 25, she was no longer the fresh debutante she once was, yet she carried herself with such quiet dignity that even the cruelest tongues hesitated before mocking her aloud. Behind fans and champagne glasses, however, society whispered another name for her, the Ice Rose. They said she was too proud, too particular, too frigid to love. After all, she had turned away every suitor who had ever approached her. Handsome heirs, witty poets, ambitious lords. No man had been good enough for the Harcourt beauty, or so the gossip said. The truth was far less cruel, and far more tragic. Evelyn had grown up watching her mother's slow decay beneath the weight of a loveless marriage, a woman once radiant, reduced to a ghost of smiles and sighs. Her father, Lord Harcourt, had married for advantage, not affection. He spent his nights in clubs and his days lamenting debts. Her mother had filled her with one lesson before her passing. Marry no man who sees you as ornament, my darling. Be chosen for your soul, or not at all. And Evelyn had obeyed, with a stubbornness that would cost her everything. Each year the invitations kept arriving, grand balls, country hunts, evening salons where laughter sparkled like champagne. She attended them all, smiling politely, dancing when required, rejecting every proposal that came her way. The young men grew weary. The matrons shook their heads. Her younger sisters had long since married, leaving her behind in the great game of alliances. In private, her father's patience wore thin. "You make us a laughingstock," he snapped one night, pacing before the fire. "Do you think beauty will last forever, Evelyn? The Harcourt coffers will not." She had merely bowed her head. "Then I shall learn to live without coffers, father, but not without peace." By the winter of 1817, Evelyn's defiance had become legend. The newspapers mentioned her only in mockery. Lady Harcourt, still unwed. She was the subject of bets among bored noblemen. Even her friends began to avoid her, fearing association with scandalous independents. Still, she endured, her pride her only armor. Until one evening, at the winter solstice ball, that armor would finally crack. The air that night was thick with perfume and ambition. The ballroom at Belgravia House glowed with 1,000 candles, reflected in the gold mirrors that lined the walls. Music fluttered through the air like laughter. Evelyn stood at the edge of the dance floor, pretending to study the portraits above the hearth while enduring the sharp-edged whispers of nearby ladies. "Still no ring, poor thing," murmured one. "She's grown cold because no man wants her." "No, because she wants a fairy tale." Evelyn forced a smile and turned away, and in that moment the crowd went silent. A ripple of awareness passed through the room, the way air shifts before a storm. She followed the direction of every gaze, toward the grand staircase. There, descending with a calm that commanded every heartbeat in the room, was Alexander Ravenshade, the Duke of Cardenfell. He was nothing like the powdered gentleman who filled London's drawing rooms. Broad-shouldered, scarred, and fierce-eyed, he carried himself not as a courtier, but as a soldier. The whispers spread like wildfire. The Iron Duke here. Rumor had long painted him as a man forged in war, feared for his temper and his duels, admired for his victories. He had no patience for frills or flattery. He was said to have buried his heart on the battlefield years ago. And yet, as his gaze swept across the ballroom, it landed and held on her. Evelyn felt it before she believed it, the unmistakable weight of his attention, not admiration, not desire, but recognition. The orchestra played on, the dancers spun, and still he did not look away. Then, to her astonishment, he inclined his head, a gesture subtle but filled with respect, and moved on. For the rest of the night, Evelyn could not shake the feeling that something had shifted. She had spent years building walls around her heart, but somehow, in that single glance, a man known for his ferocity had found the first crack. And though she told herself it meant nothing, a thought lingered, uninvited and dangerous. Perhaps the fiercest hearts are the only ones that can truly understand the ones that refuse to yield. From that night forward, the name Alexander Ravenshade became an echo in every drawing room Evelyn entered. Wherever she went, there were whispers of the Iron Duke, his arrival at Parliament, his rumored proposal to a viscount's daughter, his distant, dangerous allure. London adored him because they feared him, and feared him because no one could predict him. But what no one knew, not yet, was that the Duke of Cardenfell had not forgotten the woman who refused to look at him with hunger or awe. Evelyn thought little of their brief encounter, though the memory of his gaze returned to her in quiet moments, like the low hum of thunder before rain. Her father, however, was eager to exploit any chance to restore the family's dwindling fortune. When an embossed letter arrived 1 week later bearing the Duke's seal, an invitation to dine at Cardenfell House, Lord Harcourt's satisfaction was immediate. "Do not embarrass us," he warned her, adjusting his cravat. "The Duke is a practical man. If you've finally learned reason, you might make yourself useful." But Evelyn had no intention of making herself useful. She went because duty demanded it, not hope. The Duke's townhouse was vast and austere, more fortress than home. When she entered the great hall, the flickering firelight cast long shadows over portraits of battlefields and ancestors with the same relentless eyes. And there, standing before the hearth, was Alexander Ravenshade himself. He bowed slightly when she entered, though he did not smile. "Lady Evelyn Harcourt," he said, his voice low and smooth, carrying the faint rasp of command. "It appears London has conspired to bring us together." "London conspires about everything," she replied evenly, "especially when it's bored." A flicker of amusement touched his face. "And are you bored, Lady Evelyn?" "I am resigned, Your Grace." It was not flirtation, and yet the air between them thickened with something far more dangerous. Truth. Dinner was unlike any she'd endured before. The Duke did not engage in meaningless compliments or boastful anecdotes. He asked questions that startled her, about books, politics, the price of war. When she challenged him, his eyes lit with something that might have been admiration. "You do not fear me," he said at last, studying her across the table. "I fear very little," she answered, "and when I do, I don't show it." "Good," he murmured. "Fear is wasted on those who cannot command it." Their conversation lingered long after dessert had been cleared, and when she rose to leave, he stepped forward, not close enough to scandalize, but near enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I have met women who simper, who flatter, who obey. You are not one of them." "Should I apologize?" "Never." She left that night with her composure intact but her pulse unsteady. For days afterward, she found herself recalling the timbre of his voice, the weight of his silence. And then the visits began. At first they were proper, formal calls with her father in attendance. The Duke brought rare books for her to read, letters from his travels and small gifts that betrayed thought rather than extravagance. A pressed violet from the northern cliffs, a medallion etched with her initials. Society began to hum with speculation, the Ice Rose and the Iron Duke. A pair too proud, too guarded, too dangerous for love. Yet gossip could not name what was growing between them, a respect that warmed slowly into affection like embers beneath ash. One afternoon, while walking through the frost-covered gardens of Harcourt Hall, Alexander said quietly, "You have refused every suitor in London. Why?" Evelyn stopped, her gloved hand brushing the frozen petals of a rose. "Because none of them saw me." "I see you," he said simply. She turned toward him, startled. "Do you?" He nodded. "You are not cold. You are waiting. For what, I do not yet know, but it terrifies them. You terrify me." Her laughter escaped before she could stop it, a soft, incredulous sound that melted the chill between them. He smiled then, not the sharp smirk of society, but something unguarded, almost boyish. From that moment, the rumors changed. They danced at the winter masquerade, their movements precise yet magnetic, and every whisper of silk seemed to pulse with their unspoken tension. But while the world began to dream of their union, both knew the path before them was fraught, for Alexander carried a shadow, one born of violence, duty, and war, and Evelyn carried pride sharp enough to wound any man who came too close. Love, if it was to come, would demand that both yield something they had sworn never to surrender: control. And beyond the ballroom lights, already waiting for their first mistake, was a society eager to destroy what it did not understand. The weeks that followed were a fever of whispers and stolen glances. Everywhere Evelyn went, she felt the echo of Alexander Ravenshade's gaze upon her. London society, ever hungry for spectacle, watched them like hawks circling a wounded bird. The Iron Duke and the Ice Rose, they called them, too proud to bow, too stubborn to love. But pride, like glass, shatters at the first true tremor of feeling. What neither of them saw coming was how swiftly envy and arrogance would conspire to destroy them. It began at Lady Pembroke's winter soirée, a night meant for laughter and waltzes. The chandeliers blazed, violins swelled, and champagne flowed like temptation itself. Evelyn wore a gown of pale silver that caught the light with every breath, serene, self-contained, radiant. Alexander, standing at the edge of the room in his dark uniform coat, looked every inch the conquering hero. And yet, despite the hundreds of faces between them, they seemed tethered by something invisible. The music changed. A waltz. He approached. "May I?" he asked. She hesitated only long enough for propriety's sake, then placed her hand in his. The crowd fell silent as the Iron Duke and the Ice Rose began to dance. It was not graceful. It was alive, controlled, defiant, and impossibly intimate. Every turn seemed a duel of its own, his strength against her will, her grace against his fire. When the final note faded, their eyes met, and in that silence, something unspoken passed between them that the entire ballroom felt. And then, ruin found them. "Beautiful, isn't she?" drawled Lord Ashton Vale, a young viscount with too much wealth and too little sense. But frozen. Perhaps the Duke dances with her only to see if he can thaw her heart or her virtue. The words, said loudly enough for half the room to hear, hung like poison in the air. A few ladies gasped, others tittered behind their fans. Evelyn froze mid-step, color draining from her cheeks. Before she could respond, a deep, deadly voice cut through the laughter. "What did you say?" Alexander's tone was low, but it carried the weight of thunder. The Viscount turned, sneering. "Merely that your companion is as cold as she is untouchable. Surely even you—" He didn't finish. The Duke's fist struck him across the jaw before anyone could blink. Gasps erupted. Ashton stumbled back, blood on his lip, his pride more wounded than his body. "You'll pay for that," he shouted, clutching his face. "At dawn, Ravenshade! Pistols if you've the courage!" Evelyn's breath caught. "Alexander, no!" But the Duke's eyes, cold and blazing, were fixed on his enemy. "At dawn," he said evenly. That night, Evelyn found him alone in the Pembroke garden, the winter air sharp with frost. "You can't fight him," she pleaded. "He's baiting you, trying to drag your name down with his own." Alexander turned toward her, the moonlight carving his features into marble. "He insulted you before the ton. You think I could let that pass?" "I think," she said, voice trembling, "that a man's honor is not measured by the blood he spills, but by the restraint he shows." He closed the distance between them, his breath clouding in the cold. "You would have me walk away?" "Yes." Her voice broke. "Walk away for me." He looked at her for a long moment, his hand half raised as if to touch her face, then dropped it. "You ask the one thing I cannot give." The next morning, London woke to the sound of gunfire at Hyde Park. 2 shots, one hit its mark. When the smoke cleared, Lord Ashton lay wounded, not dead, but humbled. The Duke stood over him, expression unreadable, pistol still smoking. He had fired to wound, not kill. But scandal does not bleed, it spreads. By afternoon, every drawing room in Mayfair buzzed with condemnation. "He fought for her," they cried. "The Duke has lost his reason for a woman who doesn't even want him." And worst of all, her father, humiliated by the gossip, struck the final blow. "You have ruined us, Evelyn," he spat. "No man will ever approach you now. You are a curse on your own name." She bore it in silence, but that night when Alexander came to Harcourt Hall, she met him at the door. "You shouldn't have done it," she whispered. "I couldn't do otherwise." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "They'll destroy you. For me. I won't let that happen." His jaw tightened, but his voice was soft. "They can destroy my name, my honor, my future, but not this." He placed her hand against his chest. "Not what's here." For a heartbeat, the world was silent, 2 proud souls standing on the edge of ruin. Then she pulled her hand away, tears burning in her eyes. Then you will have to live without it, my lord, because I cannot love a man who would rather fight the world than trust me to stand beside him." And she closed the door. Outside, the fiercest duke in England bowed his head to the falling snow, and for the first time in his life, he could not fight what he felt. For days after their parting, London seemed to hold its breath. The scandal of Hyde Park had spread faster than the frost that clung to its bare trees. The tongue whispered that the Iron Duke had finally met his match, not in battle, but in love. They called Evelyn a temptress, a fool, a woman who had ruined the most powerful man in England. Yet behind the sneers and laughter, there was fascination too, because even the cruelest tongues could not deny that what passed between them had not been vanity, but something truer. At Harcourt Hall, Evelyn's father forbade her to leave her room. She obeyed only in body, not in spirit. Each hour felt like an ache. She tried to write, to read, to forget, but every word blurred into the memory of him, his voice, his conviction, his impossible tenderness. She had thought herself free of longing, yet now she understood the cruelty of love, that it does not ask for permission, only courage. For Alexander Ravenshade, courage had never been the problem. Pride had, the duel, the whispers, her father's fury. None of it wounded him as deeply as her parting words. "I cannot love a man who would rather fight the world than trust me." Those words replayed in his mind until they became a prayer. On the 5th day, he could bear it no longer. He left Cardenfell House before dawn, wearing not his ducal attire, but a simple black coat. He rode through the morning fog, his horse's hooves striking the frozen road like a heartbeat. He had faced enemies on battlefields, kings in court, and the scorn of every noble in England. But never had he feared as much as he did when he saw the gates of Harcourt Hall rise before him. Inside, the ball had already begun. Lord Harcourt, desperate to salvage his reputation, had announced that Evelyn would receive suitors again. The chandeliers blazed, violins sang, and Evelyn stood amid a sea of faces that blurred into a single wall of expectation. Her smile was practiced, her voice polite, but inside, she was numb. She thought she had buried her heart the moment she closed that door on Alexander, not knowing that he had come to open it again. When the great doors swung open, the room fell silent. The Iron Duke stood in the threshold, his dark coat dusted with snow, his eyes unwavering. He did not stop to greet anyone, did not bow to the murmuring lords or the scandalized ladies. He walked through the crowd as if drawn by something inevitable. Whispers chased him like a shadow. He dares show his face? For her? Impossible. Evelyn's breath caught as he approached. Her fan slipped from her hand. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice trembling despite herself. He stopped before her, and before the entire assembly of London's elite, the man once feared on the battlefield and revered in Parliament, now standing bare of pretense. Then, without a word, he sank to one knee. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. The orchestra fell silent. The only sound was the faint crackle of the chandeliers above. "Lady Evelyn Harcourt," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "I have been called many things. Iron Duke, commander, hero, fool, and perhaps I'm all of them. But none of those titles matter when I am before you." He took a slow breath. "They mocked you for refusing every suitor, and they mocked me for being too proud to kneel. Let them mock us both. I would kneel 1,000 times if it meant earning your forgiveness." Evelyn could not speak. Her throat ached with tears. Around them, society's most powerful men stood in stunned silence, their power stripped by the sight of humility. He continued softly, "You said you could not love a man who fights the world rather than trust you to stand beside him. I am done fighting. I do not need the world. I need you." The crowd was forgotten. She took a trembling step forward, her voice barely a whisper. "And if I say yes?" A faint, hopeful smile curved his lips. "Then I rise not as a duke, but as your equal." Her answer was simple. She placed her hand in his. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, she helped him rise, and the ballroom erupted, some in applause, others in outrage. But neither cared. In that vast, glittering room, only two people existed. Weeks later, when they married quietly in the small chapel at Ravenshade Manor, there were no grand carriages or endless guests, only candlelight, vows whispered like secrets, and the sound of winter melting beyond the stone walls. Years would pass, and they would be remembered not as the Iron Duke and the Ice Rose, but as something far rarer, two souls who met as equals and proved that even the fiercest hearts can learn to kneel when love demands it. And every year, on the anniversary of that night, Alexander Ravenshade would bring a single white rose to his wife, kneel once more, and whisper, "I would still choose you, every time."